This is George Lynch of the George Lynch Hunting Podcast Show, brought to you by Legendary Gear, the game call company that is legend by design. If you're looking for a podcast, it's all about the facts and experience. This is the place, guys. This episode, we named this episode Mature Whitetail Bucks Are Aliens. And before I get started in talking about mature whitetail bucks, one thing we do want to make clear to the audience out there, that your goals need to be realistic. It's about where you're at, where you live. If you're not blessed to be in Iowa, Kansas, or Ohio, if you're one of those guys in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and a lot of parts of Michigan, areas that there's not big bucks historically taken, then you basically, what I used to tell myself when I lived in Michigan, you got to compare yourself to those around in your area. Again, I made this statement before. If you live in a heavy hunted, pressured area of whitetails, then, the guy who goes out there and legally and morally, he shoots every year a 2.5-year-old buck with his bow. He's a good hunter. You got to dot your I's, cross your T's to shoot that class. And that might be the mature buck that's in your area, just for the fact they don't get time to live. So once you make those goals realistic and understand, like I said, compared to your area, then you could kind of judge and see how to better yourself. And that's what we're trying to do with this podcast. It's about taking our experience and taking the time that we put in, the observation of over the years of watching bucks and trophy bucks, being able to hunt states and be able to live in a trophy producing state, being able to pass up immature deer to get to the mature deer. You can't pick the fruit before it's ripe, but being able to do that, I get to witness a lot of bucks not mature. Some are mature that I just passed up because I had another mature buck on my line. But being able to pass those bucks up, you learn to observe and educate yourself on big buck behavior. And that's why I like to call them an alien, because they don't react like a normal deer. They're not a normal human being. They are from a different world. They're from a different planet. And there is a fact that 10% of your trophy hunters kill 90% of your trophy deer. So that leaves 90% of the people out there who've gone through and probably don't know what a trophy whitetail is, hasn't seen a trophy whitetail. And that's why we kind of use it with the aliens. Probably if you did a census on the alien perspective in America, probably 10% would tell you that they had the experience of dealing with the third kind. Either they saw a UFO or they had some kind of encounter. Leaves 90%, if you asked the question, they would probably say, well, I don't know, or it'd be cool if there was aliens. Probably a small fraction would probably say, absolutely not. So that is the alien. It's out in the woods where we live. I mean, if you talk to a lot of the hunters out there, they say, hey, man, and it helps a bunch today with trophy cameras or trail cams that we have today. But if you ask a lot of the hunters out there, they don't even know if the big buck exists in their woods. So again, we have to be realistic. I like to break the season up and basically into 3 parts, and it actually could be 4 parts. So let's going to break it up into 4 parts, because I don't want to put the rut as one whole thing. I like to break the rut up into a pre-rut and to a regular rut. And so what you got basically in this whole season in the deer hunting, you have early, you have pre-rut, rut, and then I call the late season. Now, some guys will get to you and say, well, there's a post-rut too. Yeah, there's a post-rut. But people don't realize that post-rut is usually it's the few whitetail does that when they came into estrus in the peak rut, didn't get bred or didn't take. And then they go, I think it's another 28 days in their cycle. They'll hit that cycle again of coming into estrus. Usually, historically in the Midwest, it runs around Christmas. It could be, but usually it's only a 2 to 3 day, and then boom, it's shut right up. But it can be a good time. But like I said, majority, I like to take the early season, pre-rut, rut, and late season. And there's so much that goes into each part of the season that I could almost make a podcast on each part of the season. What we're going to do is kind of give you a quick synopsis of each season, we'll break it down later. And like I said, in other podcasts, but in the early season, I like to talk about, hopefully we've done our scouting. And again, if you're doing early season hunting or you're doing the early summer scouting, usually in the summer, and I hope that you're doing it long range. And the reason why long range scouting is the key is that I'm trying to keep my scent and everything out of that hunting area to let a deer know that I am not there chasing him. If you do happen to do your scouting, or you're one of those guys who put your stand up in 3 or 4 days before the season comes, and whatever reason it is, make sure that when I approach and I'm scouting in the woods, you understand now we've had squirrel hunters, you might have guys cutting wood. There's always going to be some type of human activity. But one thing that whitetails do catch on quick, and especially the ones who start getting older and older, they know the scent of man, but they know the strength of that scent, but they know if they're being hounded. It's the predatorial training of coyotes or man, whatever. What I'm trying to say is when I'm walking into a woods and I see my deer runs, I purposely make sure that I do not step onto the runs. If I follow a run, I might go 4 or 5 yards down from the run, parallel with it, but I don't parallel too much. I'll crisscross. Animals have this sense, and my wife and I have horses, and their alertness and awareness to predation is 24/7. I mean, you understand when they're out there, they know that, hey, we're the animals that are being chased. We're the animals that are going to be eaten. They have that predatorial sense of that they know that there's predators out there. And when you start hounding and walking that deer run, the deer will pick up real quick that there is a predator on my tail. It throws a red flag up, but the crisscross and everything, the animals will, I'm telling you, by doing this and not putting pressure on those deer, if I'm going to be in the woods, it's going to be in that midday or the time before the rain. I love to put a tree stand up either right during the light rain, or if I can plan it just before a rain. And the reason why is because once I go in there, my scent is washed completely away. My approach into the woods washed completely away. And what that does is that takes about 5 days without the rain, and you start walking in the woods and you touch the trees and you're touching branches and cutting. It's going to take about 5 to 6 days through regular weather for your scent to start dissipating and eliminating. Now there is, like I said, again, that's why I believe like the scent, the spray or the scent suits, the scent lock, the scent shield or whatever we used to use, the carbon suits. My analogy of using that over the years, I don't ever believe that there's anything that's 100% proved eliminating man's scent, because God, this thing right here, God has made that nose so acute and so unbelievably strong that I don't think man can create anything that can completely hide what I say of the human scent. But what it can do, and this is what I notice, and it isn't just mature bucks that will teach you, the mature doe. And if you talk a lot of the trophy hunters who've passed up a lot of deer, so you see a lot of deer and you experience these deer walking by, probably one of the toughest deer to fool and to camouflage or to set your ambush is a mature whitetail doe. You take a doe that reaches to her 4.5 to 5.5 and older. She is tough because you know why? She just didn't care for herself and had to worry about protecting herself like this guy here does. He's all about himself. She's had to raise 1 to 2, maybe 3 offsprings, during the year, and she's just not caring for herself. She's teaching she is responsible for the safety of the other deer. So if you happen to hunt a food source, if you in a state that can bait, or if you're hunting a good white oak acorn, and as she comes in, you always notice that the fawns are the first ones who will come in, and she'll stand back. And as they're feeding and going to town, she is licking her nose, which licking the nose, if you watch the bucks do that, it wettens the nose and makes the scent stick better. If you ever had, I've had bird dogs, and we've hunted our whole lives hunting either waterfowl or upland game. You notice our bird dogs, if you have just a little bit of wet grass, that's actually the best time, early mornings, because that dew's out there and that scent will cling and hold on to that vegetation so much. And then better than if you were hunting if in a dry season or later in the day when you haven't had rain, that dry brush and everything, you watch the chaff, that poor bird dog, he's working back and forth, his nose will be all scratched because everything is so dry that the scent doesn't hold. So that's the reason why you see deer licking their nose constantly. It's giving them a stronger of holding that scent, then taking it into the palate, nasal palate. But that big doe, she'll sit back and then she'll study everything. And man, if there's one thing that you've done in your skyline or whatever like that, boom, she has picked that right out. So learning again by letting some of the deer go through and educating yourself and watching these deer, you can learn a lot. So that's why I'm saying when I go into the woods, you got to understand, now you might have a summer but there's no human contact. So these deer get comfortable, and they're in their bachelor groups. They're still in their summer grazing, whatever they're feeding on. But all of a sudden, you take everybody, oh man, October 1st is coming up. Season's going to be here. I haven't a chance to get out there and scout. Next thing you know, the woods is starting to erupt in October with all this scent. State land, you got people from all over. That's why a lot of your trophy hunters who hunt state land, they're trying to use river. They're using some type of water reservoir to come in back door to be able to get in and get out without leaving the scent presence or the visual presence of man into the whitetail bedroom, living room, however you want to call it. And I used to tell guys in seminars that when we got talking about whitetails, if you don't think, how do you scout your area? Do you walk the whole area? Do you walk deer runs and stuff? Are you very cautious? Are you very aware and thinking about your footsteps, your footprints, and everywhere I touch and everywhere my foot goes, that's leaving an imprint, my scent, my signature right there. And oh no, I think I walk pretty careful, and I'm telling you what, I am not so about my entrance and exit and where I step and what I touch even when I'm in the whitetail woods. And the best scenario I can tell you, and it happened to me when my daughter, I had Brooke she had to be maybe 8 years old, 10 years old, and she wanted to go with daddy out, and it was December, and I was going to go out and check one of my stands and just to take her, and I carried her in. But when I got to the stand, I say, hey honey, stay right there, I'm going to go out and move my stand, I'm going to do this. And I'll never forget the next night sitting in my stand, a little smile came to my face, but it made me aware because of the snow. I'm looking around and I see these little footprints all over the place. And honey, did you stay still yet, daddy? I didn't move. Then all of a sudden I look on the snow. It gave away. What I'm trying to say is we walk more than what we think. So be very observant, be very conscious of, where we place our feet and how we go in and get out. So when I get to that early season, now we've done our stands. Like I said, hopefully you've had your stands up for months. You've done your long range scouting. When I go in, and if I'm gonna, now since I've been out in Iowa here and I've been more conscious of hunting a trophy whitetail, I'm very paranoid about putting any pressure. If I have a big buck spotted, I don't move in and hunt him till I feel that the first time I go in, I'm going to kill him. It's not I'm just going to go and hope I see something. Every time I go on my stand, tonight's the night I'm going to kill him. I've done my homework. The wind is right. I'm not taking a chance. I don't believe in luck. I believe you make your luck. I believe you hunt smart. There's sometimes there might be a little luck of getting that right, perfect shot. But anytime I get myself within 20 yards of a mature whitetail, whether I get the shot in him or not, I feel I still won. I got within 20 yards of a mature whitetail because of the type of equipment. You'll see it here. I mean, I've hunted with compounds, but my love of hunting archery, I love a stick and string. I love hunting with a recurve. So I have to be very close to get my lethal shot on that deer. Doesn't always that happen. Now, if I had a gun, absolutely could have put him down. And I'm not one of those guys saying, hey, well, I wish I had a gun. You know what? That was part of the hunt. It was part of the experience. I had him at 20 yards. Man, that was cool. So anyway, what I'm saying in the early season, if I'm doing my scouting, and again, I'm a huge trail camera guy, and that's another podcast to get in talking about trail cameras. But the cool thing is very simple in a nutshell about a trail camera. A trail camera will let you know what's there, and the cool thing about that is it's easier to pass up a pretty good buck when you know something like this is in your area. You know, if you got a 170-inch deer that you know is living there, it's more easier for me to pass up a 150-inch deer, which in the day I didn't have a trail camera, and if I would never laid eyes on a 170-inch deer, that 150-inch deer would have been in trouble. Now, there's nothing wrong if you want to shoot a 150-inch deer, but if I know I got a 170 class that's in my area, he's huntable, that's the guy I'm going for. And it's one of those, you swing for the fence, you hit the home run, or you strike out. That's just the way. But you know what? You gave a chance at bat. That's how I look at it. So when I look at the early season, you know, so you got that change. I believe that the first 3 days are very critical. And that first 3 days, if you, like I said, stayed away, done the long range scouting, your stand's been up plenty of time. But when I get in there, that first time in the stand, and so many trophy hunters will tell you, you know, usually your first time in is your best time. Any other time after that, your odds and success go down and go down. Well, that's because you're putting more pressure. You're putting more your presence of your scent, your body. Now you probably jump deer going in. You probably jump deer coming out. The presence of man that all summer long, spring and summer, there's never been a man in here. Now you're starting to make that presence. And a mature whitetail, that alien out there, he's known that once this starts happening means that hunting season's on and I'm going to go and hold low. That's why I believe that when I'm hunting, whether it's early, what season it is, I don't like to hunt a certain family group of deer more than 2 days in a row. After 2 days, I'll break, and I believe that, you know, go to hunt another family group, whether it's 2 to 3, 10 miles away. I'm trying to hunt separate family groups, not more than 2 days, not 3 days, because I don't want them to feel that they're being hunted. And also, if you do your homework, you'll find that a lot of these deer, especially in the farm country, that there's food source all over. Now, if you hunt the northern country, northern Minnesota, northern Michigan, you might see that this isn't quite as much a change in the family groups, because once those deer are there in that area in these big woodlots, it's because of the food, whether it's acorns, whatever it is out there, it's cuttings, you know, the forestry's done cuttings. Those deer pretty much stay in that area. They'll have their different bedding areas around that core feeding area, and that's based on the wind, but pretty much that core area is kept in there because of the food. In farm country, because we have crop fields all over, those deer, I believe, every 3 days move in a cycle, and then another group might move them, but they move around in a 3 to 4 day cycle. So again, if I get one opportunity of those deer and I pass them up and then get into that second day, if I move out of there and I haven't, you know, jumped any going in, jumped going in, any going out, those deer have a chance of being more calm. They haven't had the continual pressure of man in on them. And again, whitetails do what whitetails are supposed to do undisturbed. Whitetails become fanatics and become the most adaptive animal in history. If you talk to a lot of hunters who've hunted different game, will tell you that the white-tailed deer is probably the most adaptive animal in the continent or in the world. I mean, these animals, big bucks, have learned to live right behind farmers' ponds, thickets, little areas that you might drive by, overpasses in areas that if you have an area that has a lot of population, not a lot of woodlots. I've seen deer that use on the overpasses, going under overpasses and traveling back and forth, going under the roads to travel from from a bedding area to a feeding area and back. with cars driving over it. So that's about as adaptable as you can get. But in that 3 days there, those deer are still, a lot of times are still in that summer pattern. They are in bachelor groups, means that you'll still, a mature whitetail definitely can be hanging with a yearling buck, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old. He could be hanging with them, and usually about those, he'll be behind them usually and still be back in the group. But that's a good time. And what they're doing, they're basically, they have their bedding area and they're going to food source. Their buddies are still hanging on. The testosterone levels hasn't started raising to where they're starting hitting the scrapes, or they're wanting to rub, and they're thinking about breeding. And then the competition gets a little serious, and then they start this breaking away, separating up, and start searching for that receptive doe. So on the first 3 days, you got that chance in hunting the food source. My time and it's basically religiously for me, the only way it would change it, if I knew that I had facts that this whitetail buck was going to be in a position where I could get in the morning and get in a stand without alerting deer and hunt him and kill him in the morning, I would do it. But that's not too often the case. And like I said, in early season, you're hunting a food source. The chance and the danger of going in on that food source an hour before daylight, 2 hours before daylight, there's deer out there in that food source, and they're eating. Whether it's your food plot, turnips, whatever, corn, soybean field, whatever it is, that food source, those deer, a lot of times they're in there as you're going in. So what are you doing? You're bumping deer as you're going through. You're being skyline. I think if you're going to do something like that, you're better off to go in at pink light and then scout and still hunt your way into your stand. So then I can see if there's any deer. If they're not there, then I can move again. I look again, don't see anything. I can move up here, up to my stand. And then hopefully that they might be crossing and catching one heading back to bedding. But that's why I choose more in the early season. That first week, at least, the first 3 days, I hunt nothing but evenings. And whether it's evening, whether I'm hunting early season, or I'm hunting the pre-rut, the rut, or late season, anytime I'm hunting in the afternoon, I really like to go, the majority of the guys, they hunt 2 hours before dark, or they'll hunt first thing, they'll get in their stand an hour before daylight, and then they spend the customary 2 hours in their stand. They get out, and every day it's the same time, 10:30, 11 o'clock, walking across, and trust me, the deer, they scout and they predict, they get to pattern you the way you pattern them. So if I'm going to go in the afternoon, again, we're over a food source, there's a good chance that you might get some of those does, or the younger does, or a younger buck, that they come out there, it could be a 3 o'clock, and if I go in at 4, I'm bumping those deer, and say it's getting dark at 6:30. Well, if you go in at 4 and you bump those deer are going to go through there, and that buck is probably going to be about 100 yards back in there, and he's bedded down. And now when those deer go running by him, it alerts to him, and of course he's going to look. He knows the food source. He knows exactly where those deer came from. He's going to watch those deer as they go by. It's going to take him a little time because he's going to be on pins and needles. It's going to be full alert. These ears are going to be moving back and forth. He's going to, usually a lot of times, if they're just over a knoll or a hill, he's laying where the wind is behind him, coming over the knoll, and using his eyesight to see in front of him what's approaching. So if I choose to go in early, say if it's, instead of going in at 4, I choose to go in at 12:30 or 1:30, 1 o'clock. Those deer you push, and as they go through there, again, that's not the normal time as going through. But what it does, it gives that deer enough time that he relaxes and he forgets about the deer that ran past him. He might have forgot what, in fact, these deer probably forgotten, and they will come back before him, but walk past him and then back to the field. And if you're set up before they come back to the field and never come back, they don't snort, they don't win, this old boy's going to get up normal like he always does, and he's going to head right out to that field. So choosing, again, if you're going to do your afternoon hunts, try to get in instead of the regular pattern. If you're going in 2 hours before dark and you're hunting 2 hours in the afternoon, try to stretch that to a 4-hour hunt and give yourself plenty of time of getting into that to your spot. So when you do happen to jump deer in that food source, they got plenty of time to let that they calm, and they will return and come back because you're on the food source. When you talk about the next thing, maybe you're hunting what I call the pre-rut. And if you look at the whole rut picture, you have the rut, and everybody, oh man, I want to get in on the rut. The rut's the best time to hunt. And I have to disagree on that. Mature whitetails especially, if you're hunting immature whitetail, and especially on the insubordinate bucks, if you got does coming in, if you notice in that pre-rut, she's a little nervous, but she is still thinking about feeding, still thinking about watching her fawns. And, the young buck comes in and he might want to, rut her a little bit. He might stick his nose. She real quick will shut that down on him, and he gets back and shrugs his shoulder. But she's more relaxed. Now, a lot of the guys, if you're not a trophy hunter, I mean, the rut or pre-rut anytime is a good time, and you could shoot, an immature deer. They just, because they're not doing the chasing and the breeding in an area where you have mature whitetails. That pre-rut is a great time. That's usually when you start seeing the scrapes all over opening up. You'll start seeing the big rubs start to show. This is a time, and again, this is a podcast in itself talking about mock scrapes. I'm a huge mock scrape guy, and I got it down to a science. And like I said, that's a podcast in itself. We're going to, the time of year and what we do, and it's all science, guys, and proven it makes sense. Because it's the realistic way. It's how, it's real communication for the deer. We're not using foreign scent, but, the process is a natural way of doing it. But this is the time that your mock scrapes, that you're really going to start utilizing them and working them hard. This is a time to really hunt over those mock scrapes. And the biggest thing when I tell guys, find the family groups of does and start hunting the does. Don't worry about, I need to hunt this little, I've always heard that you hunt this main run, and if you look over, you'll find the faint run, and that's a chance where that's usually the run that I'll hunt and hunting that trophy buck. And I'm telling you what, I hunt the runs unless, like I said, I get into a bottleneck area and the main run, if it's actually more of an open area, you might try to look for the faint runs that crisscross. But more than important than that, try to find some active scrapes. Find and hunt those runs that run to those scrapes from point A to point B, point A, point B. I was blessed years ago. I was tutored by a man named Roger Rothar, who today is considered the best bow hunting whitetail expert that ever lived. And Roger took me under his thumb years ago. He was the guy who got me into shooting traditional archery. And Roger's knowledge of mature whitetails was unbelievable. And he was the first guy that came up with scrape classifications. And what he did, he broke that down to, he had your boundary scrapes, you had secondary scrapes, and then what he called primary scrapes. And the boundary scrapes, a lot of you young guys will go out there, and those are the scrapes that you see at the edge of the field that the deer tear up. A lot of guys will see that, and they'll throw their stand up. The problem with a boundary scrape, it's a good place to put a camera. And if you're, early October or September wanting to put a camera, it's a good place to put a boundary, your camera up on an early boundary scrape, because I guarantee you within 2 weeks or so, the biggest deer that's in that area is probably going to pass through that boundary scrape. But I can guarantee it's going to be a nighttime photo. Your younger, more immature deer will hit those boundary scrapes. It's more of a scent check. Your mature whitetails, they're going to go, and what you'll have is what they call the primary scrapes. Now, secondary scrape is good too, but it could be that scrape that you find that in the woods scrape line, where that buck has worked and he's got a scrape line. And that scrape line, a lot of times, is done or it's made because of these overhanging branches. If you don't have overhanging branches, you're not going to have a scrape. That is the scent communication for the deer. Now, that's your secondary scrape. And a lot of guys, there's nothing wrong with that. They can set up from one scrape, and hunt between two scrapes and put a stand up. The scrape that is real hot and you're in that woods is called the primary scrape. And that usually will be your big scrape. Sometimes they'll be opened up to the size of your car hood. But what you'll have, the difference between that and a secondary scrape or a boundary scrape, is that you'll have multiple trails that come in. It looks like the old saying, it looks like a wagon wheel. Here's a scrape and here's the spokes. Looks like a wagon wheel that's coming into that scrape. That's your hot scrape. And then it isn't just one buck. You might kill a couple good bucks off that same scrape. And another thing, mature bucks aren't the only ones that are using these primary scrapes. Mature does are as well. That is how this works. That mature doe goes into that scrape. Of course, that buck, he's pawing it, and he's putting his scent down his hocks, and he's letting that doe know, he's basically the health of that buck, the age structure of that buck, and pretty much she's going to know when she smells his urine in there down his hocks that this is the big guy, that he is mature. This is my breeding stock. What a lot of times she'll do is she'll urinate into that that scrape. That buck can come through, and a lot of times these big mature whitetails, they actually don't have to be in the scrape. What they'll do is downwind the scrape first and then scent check that scrape, and they can tell if the doe is urinated in that scrape. He'll come up into that. You'll see that a lot of guys, like, again, if you're passing up mature deer and start studying this, you'll see this. They'll stick their nose and actually right into that dirt of that scrape, and then he'll stick up and he'll stick his tongue and his lip out, and it's called the fleeman, where he'll suck that air and that liquid up into his nasal cavity, and he can tell whether that doe, the age structure of that doe, he can tell the health of that doe, and he can tell if she's ready to breed, all through God's communication with animals on scent and urine. So in that pre-rut, this is the time that these scrapes will open up. This is the time that you got a great chance that that big mature whitetail can walk up to that scrape. But when I said walk, and give you that opportunity of that open shot. Now, the problem of getting with the rut is these deer are starting to chase the does. The does are nervous. The does, they're paranoid. And if you sit there, you hear, here she comes over, and she comes over the hill, and she's sitting there breathing hard. And all of a sudden, right behind her, here comes this guy, tongue hanging down to here, and he, bah, 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 bah. And he's chasing her all on that bottom, and she is relentless. She's not ready to breed. She still has her young one with her. And that's another thing we'll get into, how to tell when that buck's got the doe. And when this happens, when you start seeing that fawn, because she's with that fawn all year, when you see what he'll do, when she knows that she's close within the next 2-3 days to start breeding, he runs that little guy right out of there. And that, whether it's a doe fawn or a buck fawn, when that fawn leaves, it doesn't go far, but it won't come in, because every time he comes back to his mama, and this is the first time he's been separated from his mother. And the sad thing about this, and it's nature's way, there's nothing you can do about it. This is the time that poor little guy is susceptible to coyote or some type of predator taking him down, because this is the first time that he's been away from his mother. And a button buck is probably the most curious, inquisitive of all whitetails. He'll stick his nose where it shouldn't be, and he doesn't really know the danger of predation really that much, because mom has always taken care of that. She just tells him blows when it's time to go. Well, this is the first time that, she's had that big buck is, not her, but the big buck has pushed him away, because he wants her nothing but concentrating on him and doing what nature is intended. Now, that'll go on. And like I said, the bad thing about that rut, and it's happened to me so many times, and is that it's hard to get that good shot at that big buck, because he's moving back and forth, and that doe's under. I mean, I can give you 2 stories of a mature whitetail. I had a whitetail that we called Hercules, and he showed up on the camera. I think it was the first week of November. He popped up on my camera, and the thing about when a big whitetail, now if that had been back in the summer, I would not put pressure on that deer, and it depends what time in October if I'd have caught a glimpse. But when you get a big buck show up on your trail camera in the first week of November, he's there for one reason. He's walking and running that gauntlet looking for does. And especially if I never even had a picture of this deer all from spring, summer, and to early fall. Never had a picture of this deer. Never knew he existed, even the year before. But the first week of November, he popped up. And I'll never forget that. I saw the camera and told my wife, I said, hey, he's in there. And I did have some does. I had quite a few does. And then when I said, remember, hunt the does. You want to be their best friend. You want to stay around them. You don't want to pressure them, but you want to hunt that concentration of does that are passing through in that funnel. But there's no doubt he was there looking for receptive does. I went in, again, barometric had to be right. The wind had to be right. My approach, and I went in and hunted that deer strictly in the evenings because I had to pass a big alfalfa field and another food source to get into this bottom where I was hunting to get to this guy. I did not want to put any pressure onto this deer. Never made more than 2 days in a row, but the first time that I chose, when I had everything right to go with it, went in to hunt that deer, the very first evening, here he came on the side. And actually, it was the same woodlot where I killed this giant. He was on the same run up on the side through this multiflora rows, and I had a slight wind going behind me. Actually, it was a little bit of, north was a killer. And the only reason I chose that because that wind had some west to it. Remember, if you're hunting a big mature whitetail, a lot of times you got to hunt that wind that is iffy. It's a gamble. I mean, if it's a wrong wind, I know I'm not going to be scented. I don't want to be scented. But a lot of times, if that wind is completely right for you and completely wrong for him, he's not doing it, dude. He's not. He's going to let the younger deer, he's going to let the other deer come through first, and they're probably going to wind you, and you never knew he was there. Again, the alien that a lot of people never see. That's why. So this buck, he came through, and I was hunting that slight northwest. He was coming more from the northeast or the southwest, and the wind was blowing out of the northwest. And man, he come around, and he got about his 27 yards. He was a slight quarter to me, and man, this is awesome. I'm a Hercules. I'm gonna put him down. And that's how confident I was too. When I went in there, like I told you before, when you hunt, you feel that, hey, when I go in, I'm killing him tonight. And I'm going to make that shot. This is a shot I'm going to take, and I'm going to drill it. I'm going to bury it. That is the mindset. I don't think Tom Brady ever, when he went back to pass, whether he can make a pass or one of your great field goal kickers, I hope I can make this. They know they can make that. They've done this before. They've been here before. I know I can do this. Well, here he comes. He's walking through. And all of a sudden, he's, slight quartering to me. He does that pause, and he's not putting that nose, and he's not licking his, lifting the nose. He's not licking it. He just stops. And it's like in his head, a lot of people think that deer have sixth sense. I don't believe in the weebie-jeebie, and I don't believe in the ghost of things. Or, people like to think that stuff. I believe that this animal, when they get to be 5.5, 6.5, and 7.5 years old, they have encountered so much to preserve their life in danger that when they instinctively, God has given this instinctive skill in them to survive. And for an animal or whitetail to make it to that age, he's encountered, whether it could be dogs, cars, predators, coyotes, hunters, drives. He's learned to subvert so much of that. And I believe that when they could be walking and just a scent can run up to that nostril, and I don't believe that deer has to think about it. I believe that instinctively it hits that mechanism up here. His red flag goes up. He stops. Might even not know why he stopped, but he knows instinctively his body's saying, whoa, wait. And I believe because my approach where I went in, I had to parallel that run a little bit as I crossed. There's no other way to come in. And I wasn't 100% sure where he was coming from, but I believe that it was probably a 5-yard distance from where I had walked around to where he stopped. And it could have been closer than that, but I believe that he might have picked, because I had a little bit of that scent, he might have picked up a little bit of my boot scent on the ground. That's how smart. I believe that wholeheartedly. A deer doesn't have to be completely over your foot tracks to pick up your scent. I believe that he picked that scent completely off the ground, being 5 steps away. But he turned and went around the tree. I didn't take that shot as he was quartering away, because whether it's a magnificent animal or if it's a doe you want to harvest for meat, we owe it to that animal to make the best and most humane shot. Like, again, when I take a shot at something and I'm hunting it, I expect I am going to hit it perfect. I'm shooting for perfect. And but you got to make the opportunity that you take nothing but perfect shots. This is an animal, a creature, you know, when you think about it, it took 6 or 7 years for this creature, this animal, to live and to grow. And they just don't come out of the ground. This is something that it's beautiful. It's a thing that the good Lord created, but it takes time. So it's that respect, that reverence for that animal that, you know, it might have cost me not getting that buck, but in my heart, again today, I would not taken that shot. Because I thought he was going to come around the tree. He stopped again. But this deer just walked back the way he came. Never put up his tail, never snorted. I waited, took 2 days off, waited for the barometric hit again, get up there to that 30.1. I had a good wind, pretty close to what I had, but it might have had a little bit more west to it. Went in again. And usually when you have you get one opportunity, and a lot of times guys don't get an opportunity, but you know, usually on a mature whitetail, you get one opportunity. And if you don't make it work, you're not going to get another opportunity. You either got to move, try to find another ambush spot for him. Well, again, I think it was 2 days later, I went into this stand, wind right. I knew that I hadn't boogered that deer, and I knew that he didn't know what I was, but he knew he was smart enough to say, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not sure what this is, but I'm not walking in. He would not release himself. Talk about discipline. And I went in again, and I had a doe, and this was a yearling doe. She was maybe a 1.5 year doe, and she come trotting through, and she stopped within 5-8 steps of my tree. And again, I think she might have smelt or picked up something from the climbing sticks of going up to the tree, but she just that enough that she stopped and was like this. Now, she wasn't putting the nose, but she just put it there. Now, she could have been stopped, and she could have been waiting to see. Again, she could have waited to see how close this buck was that was chasing her, or, you know, she put her ears back to see, you know, is he still behind me? But as it wasn't long, I hear, bleh, 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 bleh. And I look over to my right, and the stand that we sat, you know, I was sitting in, you know, normally in the funnel where the deer cross through, I don't like to get super high in my stands, but because the stand was set up on the side of a hill, it was basically to down, you know, I might have been only 15, 18 feet off the ground, but to the, you know, the run that the deer went through, I could have been 20 feet off the ground. I was a little higher. Well, the problem was to the right, he was up on that hill too, and made me about only 8 feet above him. And when she stopped, I looked, and there he was. There was old Hercules, 180 plus deer. I think he got later that next year, he got killed, hit by a car, scored 184. But he was right there, and I'm watching him, and he sees her stop, ears come up, and what's the first thing he does? He starts looking up, and he looks up, and now I make sure there's brush all around me, but he was just, you know, at 10 steps and 8 feet up, you know, this big blob, he wasn't taking it. Didn't snort again. He just backed up, turned, and trotted. Their tail never went up, trotted. I'm like, no. And he went around the swale, and I could hear him, bleh, bleh. And then he called that little doe over to him. I never got a shot at that deer. That was twice. My wife had an opportunity. Actually, she didn't have an opportunity. She had a nice little non-typical buck that was in front of her. She saw Hercules in that same area, but he was up by my stand walking that side of the hill. She just couldn't get a clear shot. So actually, that was 3 times that buck was seen within probably a 2-week period, and we couldn't finish the deal. But you know what? To this day, I feel that pretty good about what I learned and what I did. I just needed that 10% of luck to close the deal. But again, when I say when you can get 10 yards of mature whitetail, within 20 yards of mature whitetail, you've done something. And 20 yards and not have spooked him out of the county. So anyway, that's my talking on the pre-rut and the rut. The third that we look at the late season, hunting the late season. Again, we're back to the late season is basically food source again. There is a late rut. that, like I said, the post rut, wherever you want to call it, it's a 3-day flurry. It's those that didn't get bred, they'll come in estrus again. You know what? If you use the analogy of hunt the does, stay there where the does, you want to hunt that food, so hunt that doe. You got a 3-day window. You got a good chance of shooting that buck, but we're hunting food source again in that late season. And the bitter cold, to me, the better. I love snow. The biggest bucks I've killed, my wife is harvested hers. Both have been in I shouldn't say both. Her first one was, it was cold, bitter cold, which helps us. The barometric pressure's up there. You know the food source. You know where they're going to be. You just got to have the right equipment, the right clothing, and and be there way ahead of time, which that gets a little tougher in the late season than what it does in the early season, to tell someone, hey, we got to show up another 2 hours earlier. We got to go 4 hours early. That's pretty tough when it might be 5, 8, 10, 15 degrees out to put up that. That's why it's important. In the late season, I choose, older that we get, my wife is involved, and a lot of you guys, if you want to get your kids and your wife involved, start looking at some of these elevated blinds. We partnered up and working with Sniper Blind, and I've used a lot of blinds in my life, seen a lot of blinds. You will not find a better made sniper or elevated blind than the Sniper Blind out here in Iowa. It can hook up. It uses truck tires with a trailer hitch that hooks up to a ball of our truck. We can move this little apartment. I can move it anywhere I want in the field. We back it up into the brush. We can, and they camouflage it the way it's painted. But between the window system, the carpet, it's insulated. What a way to go in the late season. Better opportunity to take a new hunter, my wife, or someone like that. You can send, and even for yourself, because the deer, trust me, the deer are used to it. The deer, we have video after video, deer walking in front of the blind. They're all around the blind. They pay no attention because we take away that skyline by backing that blind in to the brush. So when deer look at that, they only get the side look or maybe a front look, but they do not see a complete. They cannot skyline that blind. A lot of guys that you'll see, and everybody's seen this, driving the roads, and you look out in the fields, and out in the middle of the field, you see those sky towers out there, guys are hunting. And you see that from a quarter mile, half a mile down the road. Trust me, the deer, that skyline, the deer see. And I'll tell you what, my wife killed it was a beautiful mature whitetail, but the first night we saw that buck, we had all the deer come passing through. I forgot to pull the black shade down on the side that he came, so the window was kind of open, but we were using that so we could use it for sight. And that buck, all the other bucks came through that run and never saw a thing, and it ended up right in front of us, under us, all around us. That doggone buck, when I looked and saw him, I said, oh, babe, there's a big one. And he stood the whole time. He caught either me or her, just move our head on that side window. And he was a good 120, 130 yards from us, just into the woods. That deer never, ever moved. He stood there and that deer passed him and stared at us, stared at that blind. And I told her, wow, don't move anymore. He doesn't know what we are, but something wasn't right. He wasn't falling for it. Even all these other deer were passing by him. I thought they would still pull him out, and he didn't. We waited 2 nights, waited for the barometric to hit 30.1. It was on fire. We made sure we had our window closed. And of course, my wife tipped his toenails, and he's on the wall now, and a great story. So when getting to the late season, when getting to that late season again, we're hunting the food source. We always want to get there early. Make sure we're paying attention to that barometric 30.1 and rising. Pay attention to your wind, and you got a lot better chance. So that's the 3 parts that I break down for the whitetail season. We're going to do on some more podcasts. I'll get more in because we got so much to talk about. We're talking about equipment. We're going to talk about guns. We're going to talk about bows. We're going to talk about blinds, our scouting, rattling, mock scrapes. There's so much more goes to this puzzle. But I wanted to get this intro into you guys, get you talking about the 3 parts of the season, but getting you guys to understand and start thinking about the mature buck being an alien, that he's a different breed, he's a different animal, he's not from this planet, he's not a regular whitetail. And if you start understanding that, you're going to start putting a lot more good bucks, mature whitetails on the ground and on your wall. So I appreciate you guys, and then always remember to hunt safe, hunt smart, and may the good Lord be your guide. Well, folks, thank you for listening to the George Lynch Hunting Podcast Show, brought to you by Legendary Gear, the game call company that is legend by design. Be sure to check out all of our game calls at legendarygearusa.com. Legendary Gear has superior waterfowl and turkey calls to keep you tipping toenails. Every waterfowl call is hand-tuned by myself, so hunt smart and stay safe. This is George Lynch signing off until next week on the George Lynch Hunting Podcast Show.